Welcome to my studio. My name is Rick Manners. Over the past 30 years I've given a lot of presentations about my artwork, and I made a living as a wildlife and nature conservation artist, but very few people know about my background and what I did as a kid. And one of the things I did as a child was I loved building model cars, and I built literally hundreds of them as a child. And even today I still have every single model instruction sheet that I ever built. I still have every single one from all of the cars that we built. I also have all of my bubblegum cards, all my American Hot Rod Association bubblegum cards. I have every one. And I have hundreds of magazines from the late 60s and early 70s that inspired me as a child. Cartoons, model cars. And these are what fueled me to be creative and what taught me the hand and eye coordination to being an artist today. But one of the projects I started when I was 10 years old was a land speed car that I absolutely fell in love with, and that was the Blue Flame. And I loved jet dragsters and land speed cars and Bonneville Salt Flat. And I started to build this model as a kid, 10 years old, and it's one of the few projects in my life that I never completed. Until recently, last year I went in for an eye operation and I had 12 weeks off, and I decided to resurrect this project and take it to its completion. And today I have my 1/12 scale land speed car of the Blue Flame. And this is a car, like I say, was 50 years in the making. And what I want to do is give you a quick presentation on why I built this car and how I built this car. So come on with me and let's take you on a journey on my Blue Flame project. So let's begin with my Blue Flame project. The only place to start a story is at the very beginning, and as a child, as a kid, I loved to build model cars. And this was a model contest that they had at the Woolworths store in Burlington when I was a kid. And that's me on the far left and my older brother dead center. But one thing I loved to do as a child was draw and paint. And I've drawn all my life since I could put a crayon in my mouth. And I used to love to sketch my model cars and design different kinds of cartoon cars. And I would actually build the models, but I would do it slightly different. I would take parts from different cars, and this was an Ultra T drag car that I put the Mean Maverick engine and tires on and kind of made my own. And I used to take different cars. This was a Lotus front end, and I attached it to the Altered T bucket and made my own little car called the Hot Rod. And then I took that car and I drew all kinds of cartoons as well. I love to make cartoon strips and little adventures with this car and his rivals. And one of the unique things I built was an actual working drag strip, and all the boys from the neighborhood would all come along and bring their model cars, and we would spend hours and hours building our cars and actually racing them on the drag strip. And we had different classifications of dragsters and funny cars, and this was an old 8mm film that my father took of our car. We had little wires going down that we could pull. Oh, I think the Mustang just red lighted. But it was such a unique opportunity to be creative, and that's one thing my parents always allowed me to do, was to be creative. And we would spend hours and hours building the cars and playing with them and designing our own cars, and it was just a unique way to spend my time as a child. And I love to sketch, and I was fascinated with the rocket cars and jet cars and land speed cars. One birthday I ended up getting the Cox funny car, the Pinto, and it was so much fun out in the back. We would, in the back parking lot, the kid up the street had the Eliminator 2 dragster. We used to have drag races, and I fell in love with model cars that went fast. And I, of course, always loved the jet dragsters, the turbine jet dragsters and the afterburners on them. And especially what was happening at the Bonneville Salt Flats. And I followed very closely in all my old hot rod magazines from the 60s and 70s about what was going on with the land speed cars. And just absolutely fascinated with these guys who were trying to break the land speed record. And especially in 64, 65, when Art Arfon and Greg Breedlove were battling against each other, trying to set and break the land speed record. And even in the magazines, I used to go through all the time. Every week I would be getting different magazines and looking at all the futuristic designs that were happening, especially Greg Breedlove, who was coming up with the Spirit of America 2, this needle rocket car to break the land speed record. But I also found that a bunch of engineers in California were building an actual rocket motor to put in a custom car they were building to go after the land speed record. It would be the first rocket motor that went in a car, and I followed that very closely. Anytime that I could find photographs of the actual car, and this NASA jet pilot, Gary Gabelich, he was going to pilot this rocket car to break the land speed record. And anywhere that I could find any information about what was going on with that, I just fell in love. This was an Associated Press little video that came out showing the car attempting to break the land speed record. And when I was a kid, there were no models of this car, so I decided I was going to build my own. So I was going to come up with a 1/12 scale balsa wood car, and I started to build it. And it was very difficult because I had no plans to go by. I only had photographs and magazines, but it is the one project that I never did complete. 1970 came along, and I got more interested in music and, of course, girls. And I never did complete this project that I started when I was 10 years old, of building my own scale model of this car, the Blue Flame. So I was absolutely fascinated about this project itself. And then, of course, following the land speed record and making, the whole history of the thing just absolutely fascinated me as a kid. And then when the Blue Flame actually broke the land speed record in 1970, it was in all of the Hot Rod and Carcraft magazines, and I just couldn't get enough of this actual car. But something happened in 1970. Well, between the years, for the next 40 years, I became an adult. And I lost interest with building model cars, but that little flame that I had in my soul never did extinguish. For the next 40 years, I spent my career as an actual artist. But in 2010, I discovered these. And this was absolutely amazing. These were Rohan Day's drawings that I saw in my cartoon magazine books. And this company, Funline, was coming out with a line of die-cast cars based on his cartoon drawings. And that little flame inside me just ignited. And I purchased my first one, which was the 70 CUDA. And today, 7 years later, I have probably in excess of 2,000 die-cast cars in my collection. And of course, my Blue Flame. I found the resin bizarre model of the Blue Flame, which was really interesting. I was actually able to obtain the plastic version that the natural gas industries put out in 1970 commemorating the car. I've got a very rare wind-up car of the Blue Flame from Germany that was really hard to find. I've even got the commemorative casino token of the car's land speed record breaking attempt. But that resin model really was so well dimensioned. I really loved that car, and last year I decided I was off for 12 weeks with an eye operation, and I decided to resurrect this project and take it to its completion. So the first thing I had to do was find a set of wheels that I could set the scale of the car, and I found some front and rear wheels that would work well with building this car. And that did my drawings to scale from that actual resin model, and I came up with a 1/12 scale. So the original car is 38 feet long. My model is going to be 38 inches long. So I'm going to build it all out of hardboard wood and doweling. So I did as many sketches as I could of the profile of the car, the length of the car, getting the scale exactly the way I wanted it. I'm going to run a metal rod down the middle of the car just so to keep everything true and square. You can see the metal rod there as I start to assemble all the ribs of the car itself. I'm starting to assemble here the front assembly for the front wheel inside the chassis. So there's the front wheel, and I'm working on the nose cone here. I had an actual metal nose cone that I could run the steel rod through the center to keep that all lined up. There's the cockpit section starting to come together with the steel rod on it. I then got to the rear engine compartment, match the original car, and then of course the parachute section on the top, and you can see the stabilizer wing I'm starting to build out of wood. Then there's the stabilizer wing. I'm working on the cockpit section by taking 3 layers of the half-inch hardboard and gluing it together and then shaping it into the shape for the cockpit windows. The rear wheel assembly was really difficult. because I had to build an actual template. You can see there's the brake calipers and the wheels themselves, so I had to get the right dimension, the right distance from the body. Clamped the whole car down and then drew out my grid so I knew exactly where I was going to keep everything as square as possible. Glued the actual brake blocks down to the template. And then I used fiberglass rods from an umbrella because they had the metal clips already attached to them, and I attached the first 3 on each side, making sure that it was totally square because I couldn't get the bottom one on until I actually cut off the actual template. So once that was dry, the template on the bottom was removed, and then I was able to add the bottom 2 on each side, so there's 4 of the wheel supports on each side of the car. And then there's the completion of the rear end of the car with the brake calipers and the disc brake on there as well. I then went back to the front of the car and completed the body around the front wheels and the front wing stabilizers as well. So got those all properly proportioned. And then there's my completed rolling chassis of the car itself, all done with wood doweling and hardboard. I then looked at how I was going to skin the car and make the body, so I actually took acid-free linen paper, the same paper that I use my art prints on, and cut them to shape, and I soaked them in water so that they would dry into that actual shape. So there's all the body components of the car, all dry, and then I started to glue those onto the actual wooden chassis. So here they are getting glued into position, and I used LePage's No More Nails to actually glue the pieces onto there and to make nice sealed forms. I then coated the entire car in Liquitex matte varnish. That's going to give it that paper an actual nice waterproof surface to it. And then I actually ended up building a matte board cover to go around the front tire so that I don't get any paint or body filler on that actual front, because I can't take the tire out now that it built right into the shape of the car. I then took Bondo auto body filler and did a complete coat over the entire car. And then weeks and weeks of body filler sanding, getting that shape. I used glazed spot putty at the end and put probably 5 coats of that on to get it totally smooth. And just weeks and weeks of filler and sanding until I was happy with the actual shape of the car. And then I started to primer it, so primered it all in a flat white. Went back to the resin model to look at all the graphics of the car. So I actually took a look and photographed each of the individual elements of the graphics. And then on my computer printed them out in the scale that I needed for 1/12. Because I didn't have any water slide decals that size, or anybody here in Canada that could actually do water slide decals that size. So I had to come up with a second alternative. And here is the color starting to come onto the car now, the pearl white and the blue. And then here there's the front wing stabilizers in the foreground that are painted, and I'm starting to work on the cockpit windows. So I wanted to make sure that I had the exact shape for the cockpit. And there's the final painting on the rear wing stabilizer. And then to the back of the car, and you can see there's the CB radio antenna I've got attached to the rear wheel on the left side of the car. Back to the cockpit windows, so once I was happy with the template, I drew them in pencil, painted them in black, and then came back across with some airbrush white highlights on there, and then painted in the frame of the window. And then back out to the garage and put probably 10 to 15 clear coats on the car itself. And then once that was dry, I brought the car back in and started to finalize the size and shape of all the lettering that was going to go on the car. I then sent it out to an automotive vinyl manufacturer so that I could do it all in automotive vinyl. So there's the main sheet that went off for printing. And while that was being printed, I worked on the rear of the car, getting the engine compartment ready. And then there's the final car all assembled with the clear coat on it, ready for decaling. When the decals finally came back in, I ended up trimming them out and sticking them on. The hardest part was actually the word, the blue flame, because I wanted it to go across the degradation of the blue to white, showing the letter. So I had to hand cut every single letter out of there for the wording on both sides. And then it was attached onto the car, making sure it was in the right position and size. And then there's my final car all completed. And this is really interesting to be able to take this project. It took me just over a year. Took the car outside to get some product shots of it out in the sunlight. So there's my final car. And it was just a car that I loved as a child. And I was absolutely fascinated with Gary Gabelich and this land speed attempt record of the car. And it's one project that took me 50 years to complete. And I finally now have my 1/12 scale replica of the land speed car, which I will cherish for the rest of my life. And thank you folks for watching my presentation.